Hello everyone and welcome to the latest in this series of Access Live webinars in association with the Event Production Show. My name is Christopher Barrett, I'm the editor of Access All Areas magazine. This session, Counter-Terrorism, Next Generation Control Rooms for Next Generation Threats, is brought to you in partnership with our sponsor, Halo Solutions. A big thank you to them for supporting this episode and to you, the viewers, for joining us. We do want to hear your questions, so you'll see at the bottom of the screens the Q&A button, so please do enter your questions in there and we will open the panel to your questions during the last 10 to 15 minutes of the session. First of all, I'll introduce the panel. As Head of Operations for OCS at the NEC Group, Gavin Ward covers 5 venues across Birmingham, including the ICC Birmingham, the Vox Conference Centre, the Genting Arena and Arena Birmingham. Sports Ground Safety Authority Inspector Jill McCracken has a wealth of experience in event security, including at the Cricket World Cup, Britain's most recent major global tournament. Very much in the front line of evolving security practice and solutions, Lloyd Mayer is CEO and co-founder at event safety specialist Halo Solutions, which recently launched an incident management platform, Halo Talk, which combines video calling, video recording, image sharing, ticket scanning and radio. We're also very lucky to have Fegan Murray. Fegan lost her son Martin Head in the Manchester Arena terror attack of 2017 and has since been a passionate campaigner for improved security at events and a force behind the proposed introduction of Martin's Law. Thank you all for joining us, especially you, Fegan, as I understand it's your birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank
you. The events industry may well be tied up in the battle for survival due to COVID-19 restrictions, but one of the biggest issues it faces prior to the pandemic, and an issue that will be no less paramount when venues reopen, is the threat from terrorism. The Manchester Arena attack and others, such as at the Bataclan in Paris, made the events industry re-examine its approach to anti-terrorism security. But has enough been done? And what can be done to ensure next generation control rooms are equipped for next generation threats? Fegan, if you don't mind, I'd like to start off with you. Obviously, the Manchester Arena inquiry has been going on for quite some time. It's ongoing, and it's highlighted a number of issues. So far, do you feel it's having the desired effect in terms of the impact it's having in the industry and the issues it's raising? Do you feel like it's been a positive force so far?
Yeah, well, it's obviously the inquiry is incredibly thorough, and chapter 7 was the security chapter that's just finished before Christmas, and I feel that the judge is thinking of writing a report on that section by the anniversary of the attack in May. So hopefully that will feature Martin's Law as one of the important things to come out of the inquiry. Martin's Law was mentioned a lot, and I know for certain with all the work I've been doing over the last few months that the security industry is behind it. And the fact that it was mentioned so often in the inquiry and had so much support makes me feel quite hopeful that it's going to be a positive result, yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of Martin's Law, can you just give us a little bit for some people who may not be completely familiar with exactly what it consists of and what the aim of it is? Could you just give us a little bit of background and
Yes.
also where it's at in terms of the sort of steps towards becoming legislation?
Right. So Martin's Law was a piece of legislation we put forward to the government. It's basically a very straightforward, common sense few steps. It consists of 5 steps. Step 1 is that we ask people who are working in the industry where people are visiting, etc., that the staff or the majority of staff have the free online online training, just to give them a basis. Number 2 would be that people do a risk assessment in the building before an event. Number 3 would be any risks identified should be mitigated as much as possible. Number 4 is that venues ought to have an terrorism action plan similar to a health and safety action plan. And the last one really applies to bigger venues, so that the local authority works in conjunction with the venues. Say, for instance, a concert finishes, that the traffic lights maybe are set that they are quicker, changing quicker, and people can exit faster, and so the crowds disperse faster. So it's simple measures. As far as the progress, so this is with the government. The consultation is going to be launched by the end of this month. It was meant to be launched much earlier last year, but COVID-19 got in the way and kept delaying it. And COVID-19 also means that the usual 12-week consultation will sadly take 18 weeks. And after that, obviously, I suppose the government need to evaluate the results, the findings of the consultation, and then we will discuss further. In the meantime, we are having regular meetings with the government about it.
Okay, and are you kind of reasonably, or how happy are you, I suppose, with the feedback that you've been, or the reaction that you've had from the events industry, particularly to Martin's Law and everything you've raised?
Well, I've had, when I put on Twitter, I do a lot of work behind the scenes. I actually do, because I do a lot of phone calls, discussions with different people in the events and security industry. I've had lots of meetings when COVID-19 allowed it. So I have been quite involved in working on Martin's Law, apart from the government. But the security industry, I'm overwhelmed with the kind of support I have for it. It seems to be that the industry wants it for sure. And it would be lovely if Martin's Law came into fruition by the end of the year or early next year. Although I know it's not going to be called Martin's Law, it's going to fall under the government's protect duty within the contest document.
Okay, thank you very much, Regan. Gavin, obviously up in Birmingham with your client, UNEC, you're looking after, huge venues that are some of the busiest in the country when they're actually allowed to open. So you're on the front line, I guess, at arenas, at big venues. How has the impact of the Manchester Arena tragedy and the inquiry and everything else, how has that impacted your sort of the way you work, and what improvements have you seen in the industry? And as far as you're concerned, is everything being done that should be being done?
I suppose to go on to the final point that you've said there, is everything being done that should be done? We want to work towards that. There's always, I think we've got to be hesitant to say, yeah, we're doing everything that we can, because there's always lessons to learn. Clearly, the venues that we look after on behalf of our client, the NEC group, are the Resorts World Arena and the Arena Birmingham. And through the inquiry report, there's obviously been a lot of synergy between Manchester as a venue and in particular perhaps the Resorts World Arena at the NEC that used to be the LG and then the Genting, because of the kind of campus that it sits on and the railway station and things like that. I kind of came to OCS as an organisation that looked after the NEC post Manchester, so I think that's probably indicative of the view of the security industry, in view of private security, to look at taking people perhaps from a policing or public sector background to look at afresh at what we're doing within arenas, and that's where I came in. I mean, I'm very, very lucky to have the NEC group as a client, because I think they've always been quite open and working. I think the big thing for me has been the kind of partnership work between the venue and us as a security provider. I think that one thing that, and Fegan kind of articulated really well earlier, is that the security industry wants this. This is supported. This isn't something, it's all common sense things. It's things that we'd go, well, that makes sense, that makes sense, that makes sense. And I think that what Martin's Law, or whatever they call it, I think in the industry we'll still call it Martin, it'll be referred to as that anyway, is it's a catalyst for that to happen as an industry standard. The things that I've seen, to answer your other point really, what have I seen from a wider point of view? Again, we're a kind of tier 1 credit place, so that relationship with the local authority, with the counter-terrorism unit, exists for us already. But that dare to share and sharing of information does really seem to have been a focus that I've seen in my in the 3.5, 4 years that I'll have been around this year, is the sharing of information. And I think that's where we've got to keep the momentum. It's the sharing of information and the flowing through of intelligence and an actual information and intel on the ground. That's what we've got to keep the pace on. And that's bear in mind, yes, we've got COVID at the moment, but look at, things haven't gone away, threats haven't gone away. They've been put on ice. If they haven't even been put on ice, things could still happen. But we've got to keep that momentum.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, obviously, there's sort of concerns that with COVID-19 has had an impact on literally almost everything. So, it's certainly going to have an impact on event industry budgets in terms of, we've had, well, it's obvious what's happened in the last sort of 10 months. So, how concerned are you that going forward, the money that's going to have to be spent on COVID mitigation measures within events, COVID safety measures, to whatever degree they're going to be, we don't quite know, but they're bound to be some. You've got sort of smaller budgets or impacted budgets, and then you've also got added expenditure around COVID-19. What concerns are there in the industry about how that might impact the focus and the investment in security services?
I suppose on the impact would be on the industry as a whole. There's a risk, if you like, there to do that. Again, we looking at some of the bigger companies. If you go to one of the main arenas in the UK, or one of the promoters or organisers or groups that own them, I think there's going to be that focus there. So the challenge is perhaps less so. I think the risk goes down to smaller venues where their margins and the impact from COVID and their operating costs are going to be squeezed. There's a difficulty, around there when some of the kind of smaller venues. So I think, as speaking for the industry as a whole, my concern would be around, a small academy somewhere that doesn't have the ability to put the big American tours or promoting shows on, or exhibitions and conferences, or backfill with things when they haven't got shows on and things like that. So I think we have to be really, really careful with the COVID kind of situation coming out of it, that we don't behave a little bit like the minis football or rugby, the kids following the ball round, and everyone's just focused really, really solely on the ball there. When the big winger runs down the side, no one's looked at that. Sorry for my rugby analogies. I tend to go off in that direction often. But I think that there is a risk there. I think that what Martin's Law does, and we're unapologetic about referring to it as Martin's Law as we go through this, so we know exactly what we're talking about. What Martin's Law does is, by putting legislation in that's got to be done, is it protects the security industry a little bit, and the ownership of that risk, rather than saying, well, it's the security provider or the security partner's fault over this. Actually, that's got to be shared, and it gives a little bit of support to that security provider that may be a security company that does 2 venues. They're going to be able to go and say, actually, no, we've got to do this. We've got to do this from compliance. So I think hopefully that counters some of that there, but there is a risk. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Jill, can you just talk us through a little bit about your work with the Sports Ground Safety Authority, just to give us a bit more perspective as to kind of what your day job involves, really? And also, do you feel that COVID-19 there's a danger that will take the wind out of the sails of the good work and momentum that's that's obviously been put in place on the back of the move towards Martin's Law and everything else that's been happening prior to COVID-19 in the security industry?
Okay, yeah, so for those people that aren't familiar with the Sports Ground Safety Authority, our job really is on behalf of government to basically support football clubs and local authorities in the licensing regime, because obviously with football clubs, we're talking about licensed venues where legislation applies, and the inspection regime is generally higher. That's our job at the SGSA. What we've seen, obviously there's been this horrible stop-start phase, which has been really difficult for venues to get their head around. A lot of them have been in the position where they've been closed and no spectators, and then all of a sudden they've been able to open up and have maybe 2,000 spectators in. And actually, you know, for some clubs, it's not cost effective to have only 2,000 people in your ground. It costs clubs more to have that small number of spectators back in. And the profit margin on that is very, very low, as sort of Gav's alluded to. I think one of the things we've been doing, and again, I'm sorry, it's very football specific, but we've been doing interim assessments with football clubs and local authorities, basically to try and cover off what you've just mentioned, Chris, that piece around, are we allowing football grounds to go into almost a state of mothball? And then, you know, maybe in 2 weeks' time, if they open up, are they going to be safe, you know, structurally? And are stewards, you know, still relevant and fresh and know what they're doing? We've actually been doing a piece of work with both clubs and local authorities to make sure that grounds are maintaining safety standards, and local authorities are on top of some of the licensing changes that we've made. So to answer your question, I can only obviously speak for football. We are doing all we can to support grounds to make sure that they keep safety and security high on their agenda as possible.
Okay, thank you. And Lloyd, obviously I'd like to bring you in. I mean, what do you're obviously a sort of service provider, and you know you work with numerous clients. What do you believe events and venue operators should be doing to get ahead of the curve to ensure their events are as safe as can be, really, when the industry is allowed to reopen?
Well, I think I benefit here from having listened to Figen and Gav and Jill, and I think it's great to hear everyone on the same page, and it seems to be around mindset. I think that we benefit from some of the greatest safety officers in the world that have our MVQ level 4s and work in our sports stadiums and arenas and venues. And I think when we draw parallels with other legislation like health and safety legislation, fire legislation, that gives those safety officers the tool and the air cover to turn around and say, I need to do this, I need those resources, I need this number of stewards stood on those doors to achieve that plan. And my hope for Martin's Law is that it ushers in that similar parallel, so that we have safety officers and security providers who can turn around to their clients, and the first step should be to make the event safe and then hold the event. And I think getting ahead of the curve would be around attending things like this, looking for CPD, reaching out to colleagues, making sure that the cobwebs are dusted off and everything can reopen safely. I think the DCMS are running projects called Fan Ready, get ready for the return. And that return is going to be a melting pot of complex challenges. It's going to be counter-terrorism security, it's going to be biosecurity, maintaining the already great standards we have of health and safety and fire risk assessment. And with all of those complex challenges, it comes down to that mindset of cost, that mindset of, do we have to do it or should we do it? And I think if people are ready to embrace those conversations, some software out there, not just ours, but there's lots of other software that can come together to make the investment in technology safer in those next generation control rooms and the broader processes that support them. Some stuff can be as little as 47 pence per day, at the same time that some of these clients and clubs will be paying £20 million to buy a new footballer. So if they're investing in security, they're supported by the local authorities, they've achieved that mindset. For me, it all goes hand in glove and supports exactly what the other three panelists have been saying.
Okay, thank you, Lloyd. Gavin, this one's for you. One of the issues raised at the Manchester Arena inquiry was communication problems and challenges, which led to confusion and delays and in aspects of the response. Obviously, you know, the industry's been looking at that and examining that. I mean, should there be more of a focus on finding improved ways of sharing information between private security personnel and police, so it can be ensured trustworthy sources?
Yeah, I think there's 2 points. I suppose there's from a real lifetime getting information across is how do the emergency services take information when our control rooms phone 999? What stories put on to that and what grading? Because sometimes we see different levels of, for me, from being a former police officer, that, granted, to be fair, in about 1996, worked in a police control room, so it's a long, long time ago. But I think I've got a fairly good understanding of what would be an immediate response or a standard response and what have you. So I think that there's one thing from a lifetime incident, making sure that we've got a kind of unilateral approach towards, if a security control room calls up and says this is happening, that's covered quite well with the kind of JESIP principles and methane incidents. But do all venues use that? Do they all know that? So Fegan talked earlier about the act and scan. I think for me, control rooms need that, but we need that kind of interoperability between private control rooms and police control rooms. So that's one element. The second element for me, and this is more of I don't want to say slow time, because these things could be really, really important. But I think where we've got possibly a little bit of a gap is private security getting intelligence into the police, into the security services. Yes, we've got the counter-terrorism hotline, and you can go through Crime Stoppers or your local police. But I don't know. My thoughts, and I suppose it's a discussion point, should private security companies, whether when they get to ACS approved or whatever point, have a means to input intelligence on a 5x5x5 system where their intelligence or the information they're putting in is graded as trustworthy because they've had some training, because they've gone through that ACT training, because they've gone through that JESIP training. So should there be and in my view is this would need to be a kind of a nationally transferable, identifiable system that, as me as a security control room, could go, do you know what, for the last 3 hours we've had the same guy walk past the arena, walk by the train station, walk by this is his description, this is the link to the seats. I appreciate some data protection things and what have you like, but actually we shouldn't stop doing these things because safety's got to come first. And we can input that information. And for me, again, I'm really, really lucky that my teams can pick up the phone to our counter-terrorism advisor. But I'm lucky. We're lucky to be able to do that. I'm not sure everybody's got the ability to do that within the industry. And so I think that for me would be something worth looking at for getting information in.
Thank you. Okay. Lloyd, looking at the information coming out of the Manchester Arena Inquiry, it's clear that overcrowded radio channels and unregulated WhatsApp groups, untrustworthy spreadsheets, all these kind of things have caused a hindrance. They were a hindrance, and they reduced efficiencies, and they cost time, money, and even lives. So, what should be done in the next generation control room? Without pitching your product too much, but what led to the Halo tool platform?
Yeah, no, it's all right. I won't pitch it at all. It's not about us. It's about the human being. It's about the human being in the control room. That one person who is coordinating all of these efforts. And when the arena, any arena, is in steady state, they're coordinating all of the opening tasks, the running tasks, the closing tasks. They're coordinating radio updates, probably WhatsApp updates, probably CCTV. If we start with that human being, more often than not, we find people who are in that post because they've got an injured knee, or they don't really want to work a particular shift, or they can't work outside, or it's not always someone who's had the appropriate training, the appropriate investment, the appropriate support, the appropriate coaching. So I think those people try really hard to do their best, and everyone around them can help them do more. And then when we look at those lines of communication that are coming in, we know when we focus on the human being, they can do about 7 things at once, plus or minus 2. So if you've got someone who can do 5 things at once, and they're having to listen and type, they may or may not be a proficient typist, they're going to start summarizing what's said. If everything starts to get a little bit busy, instead of typing, they're going to write it down and come back to it later. And we start to layer on different levels of complexity, and that starts to become overwhelming. And then you transition from steady state to crisis state, And it doesn't have to be terrorism. It could be flooding or fire or a fire alarm, or it could be multiple smaller things which come together to create a crisis state. What's happening with that missing person at the same time as the slip, trip and fall, at the same time as the suspicious person that was outside. And all these things are reasonably foreseeable. So if we know about them in advance, what processes and systems are we putting in place? Have we got CCTV, which is easy to manage? Is it cloud-based? Can we view it all in one space? Have we got dedicated CCTV operatives, or have we got someone looking at it over the shoulder and trying to do their best? Have we got, instead of WhatsApp groups, which can't be regulated, can't easily be shared with inquiries, can't really be used for security and insurance claims, certainly. And when we first came into this 3 years ago, we were invited to an event, and I was put into a WhatsApp group with 750 people. It was like looking at lines of the Matrix flashing before my eyes. Incident management in there was impossible. So by offloading all of that stress, you can create something which allows the front line to report in directly without clogging up the radio channels. There are mobile apps. We provide a mobile app to do that. And then all of a sudden, people at the front can submit information firsthand. You don't have to listen to it and type it down. You don't have to talk on the radio. You can share images at the same time, and you can receive any 10,000 things at once instead of having to wait in a queue on a radio channel, which allows the human being with that extra capacity to process the things they need to. So the vision for the creation of our product is focusing on the person. That person is either a 20-year-old, 18-year-old young person who's doing a bit of stewarding, a bit of door work to supplement university, or it's someone who's been a professional steward and security operative throughout their life, or it's someone who's returned to it later in life. Maybe they're a fan of a cricket match and they turn up 60, 65 years old, do a bit of stewarding and watch the cricket at the same time. There's a full range of people and they need it to be easy. If it's any more complex than sending a text message and you're giving them a radio and you're giving them a Halo device and you're giving them a ticket scanner and you're giving them all this different technology, they don't want it. And that's going to create another problem. If it's all in one place and it's easy and cost effective, then it saves lives, reduces costs and reduces time spent.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Makes perfect sense. And Jill, from your perspective, do you see that venues, particularly in the events industry, events professionals, are doing enough to tackle the issues and investing in upskilling and training, investing in better, improved equipment, extra radios, incident management systems? What are you seeing? Is it does it look like a positive view? That's from your perspective.
Yeah, I think I come back to what Gav said. I think it was Gav about people are really trying to do their best, but nobody wants to operate an unsafe or an unsecure venue. But we come back to cost every time we come back to cost. But I think the industry itself is, there's the new spectator safety qualifications, for example, which now include counter-terrorism training, a bit of first aid training. All these new processes are slowly starting to come through, which are obviously another positive step. To talk about is the control room, is the communication, is all that good enough? Well, I think we could all do better. When I was the safety and security director for the Champions Trophy in 2017, I didn't have a particularly good system of communication. I improved it massively for the World Cup in 2019. But it's not always easy if you're bought into existing systems to try and make a quick, cost-effective change. So I think everybody will acknowledge there is work to do. I don't think anybody, I certainly don't see anybody that doesn't prioritise safety and security. There's an awful lot of material out there, webinars, particularly since COVID, that we have webinars all the time, which is great for CPD. The concept of sharing ideas between people, it's that, again, dare to share principle. in terms of intelligence and information sharing, I do agree with Gav. I think that should, there are some real quick wins there. And even if you're just circulating and sharing information with your neighbouring venues, the police do have a dedicated events intelligence unit that I know is slowly sort of gathering a bit of momentum. But I guess, Chris, to answer you, I think there's always room to do better, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
Okay, that's great to hear. I mean, you obviously deal with big venues, so this might be a difficult question for you to answer, but I'm just wondering, for a smaller venue operator working on tight budgets, are there any kind of quick wins, for want of a better way of putting it? Are there any kind of sort of reasonably, cost-effective steps that everyone should make sure that they take?
I think, again, I think if you were able to spend time with a venue one-on-one, you could start looking at things like, what actually does your tech do for you? Have you got loads and loads of systems that you're spending a lot of money on, when actually you could maybe streamline those and get a better comms system and a better ticketing system, whatever, combined. And Figen's main point about risk and response, I think, again, if you could start from scratch and you've got time to take a really good look at your venue, then start looking at what risks have you had. What are the reoccurring themes at your venue over and over again? Are you constantly getting, people that come in with fake tickets? Have you got problems? I think there's a time now where spectators aren't attending events, that there is an opportunity for people just to have maybe a bit of a deeper look at what's in their venue, what is working, and how you could make some small changes. But listen, I know it's not easy. I've worked in multiple venues, multiple events, and I know it's a lot easier said than done. But you've got to start somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thanks. And Lloyd, as we sort of mentioned earlier on, obviously, the pandemic's had a huge hit on the industry's finances. Realistically, do all events need a counter-terrorism assessment? And what advice would you recommend?
Wow. Okay, so I can only draw on the policing experience I had towards the end of 2019, working in a very similar arena, and there was a threshold for assessments. I don't know if it's changed since 2019, and I'm certainly not a counterterrorism security advisor, but I understood the threshold to be if there were more than 10,000 people coming, and then there was a risk matrix that was wrapped around that. Is it on live television? Has it got a high profile person attending? All of those things that come towards that matrix. And what I can say is, when it was done, it really helped. It really made a difference. It helped to inform the resources that were deployed. It helped to inform whether the police went or not, if it was a cheese and chutney church festival, or if it was a really high threat, really high profile event. So, and then what resources go? What's the ratio of police officers to firearms officers? Are they wearing protective equipment or wearing normal uniforms? So all I can say is, when I've seen them done, they've been a huge benefit. When it comes to threat assessing everything, there may well be a shift towards the private sector having tools to help themselves. Teach a man to fish, you can get more fish, rather than just giving fish all the time. The police would undoubtedly suffer if everything was being done all the time. There's some great companies out there who provide training to the private sector and upskilling so that they have their own counterterrorism awareness. There's stuff you can get for free. There's professional courses you can go on. There is the steps we're going to take with our software to include some of that. So the best decisions are always made when you've got the most up-to-date information and intelligence, and people need to ask themselves, if they're decision makers, where am I getting my information and intelligence from? What threat and risk assessment am I making? And if they're, circling right back to Figen's introduction, if there is legislation there that supports that journey down that road, because you will go into a stadium and you will find fire wardens and doctors and people who have done health and safety risk assessments. Therefore, they do health and safety risk assessment courses, and they're invested in, and they do a great job. The gaps are around threat assessment. not just risk assessment, those counter-terrorism threat assessments, and the whole thing dovetailing together. That's what I would say if I think that's an answer. I've tried to get around it. I think that's okay. You'll tell me.
I'm going to put the same question to you, actually, Gavin, regarding whether all events need counter-terrorism assessments, and also on a sort of double question, I suppose, just as a positive note, what are you most pleased to have seen done in terms of progress, steps taken by the security industry in the last few years?
Okay, I suppose to come to the first point, really, and again, it goes back to what Figen says about ACT and things like that. So and there was a point that was made, 1 or 2 points previous to that, what are the quick wins? Okay, the ACT and SCAN training that can get pushed out. I redid ACT and SCAN a couple of weeks ago. It's a really good package, to be honest with you, and it's interesting, it's informative. I think that's one thing that people can do as a quick win, if you like, because it's available to you. It's really positive. Ought to be as part of our new rollout, because the bottom line is there needs to be one message, really. So some people will be Project Griffin trained or whatever they are. Let's try and get everybody in the industry getting pushed through so they've got that ACT and SCAN training. So we've all got that one message. So the training is consistent across the piece. So that's one thing that I would say there. Does every event need to be counter-terrorism risk assessed and what have you? In essence, yes, but how you do that can be from an overarching view. If you've got exhibitions or conferences, and what I would advocate is between the security provider, the organizer, and the venue owner, that you've got a shared security strategy. So you've got one strategy of how you deliver security through training, through briefings, through the sharing of information, and this is really, really key. For me, this is another quick win is probably the wrong term, but identify your decision makers. Okay, identify your decision makers and give them the tools to make those decisions and support them. Because when it's all fine on an event and things are all going tickety-boo, and it's that the kind of person's just going, yeah, this way, sir, this way, sir, this way, sir. But when things go slightly wrong, people need to go back to. They need to have had that training or that input to let them know. Go right, okay, we're in a situation now. It's going slightly wrong. Click. I need to start making some decisions. Give them that tool to make the decision. So I think the NDM, I've unashamedly within. Basically, we set up a venue and events division, if you like, post Manchester to focus on venue and events. I've got my venues that I look after, but there's more venues across the country. We've put in a decision-making model for our staff. When they have a briefing sheet now, they have a briefing sheet with the information. I'm holding my hands up, you can't see me, can you, because of the background bit. They have the information that they need on that sheet, and then on the back we'll have that decision-making model. So if they need to, and we're obviously using, moving forward now with using Halo and our staff being trained in that. But in the meantime, recording the information, the decisions they've made and what they've done when they have done something, it kind of empowers the team. It's twofold really. One, it gives us the right culture. So we build the right culture around security, letting them be able to, if they want to give us information, they've got a means to pass that on to us. If something goes wrong and they take action, they document it in a set way. So we can say, well, why did you do that? What was the information that you had? What was the risk that you thought? What were your options? And what actions did you take? And so we can kind of process that. So for me, a couple of points there. One message through training, ACT and SCAN is great, and your local CTUs and your police forces will facilitate in getting that delivered. Getting the decision makers within your teams so they understand what they can do and where they go, and not tying them up with unnecessary work. That feeds into your venue kind of security strategy. That's so if if you've got, again, it's difficult to try and take it away from the National Exhibition Centre or somewhere like that, that we'll all naturally always have that risk assessment done. We'll always do that. But I'm minded that we also, in our division, look at some smaller venues that might have the cheese and scone or whatever Lloyd referred to. But if we are a venue that's hosting events and you've got a security strategy for the way that you deliver events, it may be that you look at this type of event and this is what we agree, and then you go back to the organizer and say, as a venue, this is what we expect, these are our minimum standards of security, so everybody knows from the outset. Then you also, goes back to your decision makers, we know who's owning that responsibility. So within with a client provider relationship, we know what's my responsibility, and that I've got the ability to go back to the client and say, I'm not sure about this. I think that we need to have a discussion on this point. So because that strategy is already set out, so we're ideally we're pushing against an open door. We don't want to get to the point where I'm having to argue for, and again, I'm lucky I don't have to, because we have one of the things. I suppose this leads on to your second point. One of the things, the things that I'm seeing that are positive is we have a joint security board where we sit down and our way forward gets discussed. I would absolutely promote that, whether that's monthly, quarterly, whatever, whether you can have the key decision makers in a room together when we get beyond this, or on a Zoom call like this, that can sit there and say, what are our issues? What are our gaps? And the security provider, if you need to get some training done, get that done. And if the security provider or the venue need to co-fund or whatever it is, have that open discussion, because everything's fine until it isn't. And when it isn't, it's catastrophically not. So that has to be, let's use this time now to iron out all of those kind of challenges and what have you, get to the point. And if there is a security strategy that's shared between the two, I think most places will have made a step forward.
Great, thank you very much. Figen, I'd like to bring you in again, please. In general, do you feel that the events industry has sat up and taken notice? I mean, you mentioned earlier on that, the security industry's really been supportive of what you've been trying to achieve and what you've been, the flag you've been waving and the message that you've been very powerfully communicating. But in general, are you satisfied? How satisfied are you that the events industry are putting the safety of their customers first?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is really music to my ears from all the panelists. It's really encouraging. But also the conversations I've had within the industry, people have said to me, yeah, I run a security company, and when I offer a cost sheet to a customer, a prospective customer, and they say, no, that's too high, too many security people. Some of those people walk away and don't take the customer on because they don't want to have their name attached to that, So people are working in a very ethical way, and I really like that. And I think for me, what was mentioned earlier, for instance, about, should there be more security for high profile events or if it's live streamed? But, any life is important. Nobody should have no security because they're not an important person. So, any loss of life is horrible. And like somebody said on the panel, it's catastrophic. It destroys lives. And therefore, security should not be the bit where money is saved. And adding to that, though, I hasten to say, it is proportionate. We wouldn't, Martin's Law isn't about wanting to make people bankrupt and small theatres having to install X-ray machines and stuff. It's all proportionate. Often it's very simple measures. And like Jill mentioned, sometimes it is looking at what is in place, and maybe there are different, more cost-effective measures that can be put in place that will do the job just as well. It's just re-looking at security as a whole. So the industry, the feedback I'm getting from different people is phenomenal. It's really positive.
Thank you very much. This may be a ridiculous question, so I'm sorry if it is a very difficult one to answer, but if you could change one thing at all kind of events or all venues as easily or swiftly as clicking a switch, what would it be?
Are you asking me? For me, when I reflect on the whole, whatever has happened and the inquiry and everything, and listening to people in the industry, I think it's dawned on me that Martin's Law is just the bottom rung of the ladder. A lot of other things have to change or have to be improved, and the security industry is slowly working on it. That's the impression I get. But for me, the one thing that has really stood out personally is the training. Often it's available free, but there's got to be a baseline for training staff so that they are aware. And the culture of, yeah, terrorists are real and terrorism does exist and it will continue to exist. That is really something that people need to take on board more.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, well, thank you all of you. We've only got a few minutes left, so I'm just going to bring in one of the questions from the audience. This is from an anonymous attendee, but the question is, do you think there will be an element of authorities, contractors, venues covering their backs and imposing unrealistic demands on security numbers? Would there be a standard baseline of numbers to aid planning without unrealistic back covering becoming a problem? Would anyone like to take that one on? Jill, would you be okay to answer that one?
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually. We're rewriting our safety management guidance, which for those of you that are familiar with the Green Guide, which talks about P factors, this is the sister to that document, which talks about S factors. And one of the questions in there, it focuses very much on staffing, on resourcing, on the skills and attributes, security and stewarding assets should have. And I think the message we want to get out more than anything is there is no one size fits all. And I think it would be great if you could almost sort of, somehow say, well, as a minimum, you've got to have X. But I just think that's impractical. And I think sometimes that takes away the need to look at actually what your risk is. We come back to what is the risk at your event. And if it's a small country fete somewhere, or it's, a huge sporting event, a World Cup final or something like that, the two are going to be different. They're going to be different levels of attractiveness to targets. There's going to be different search regimes. You don't underestimate as well what sports governing bodies in particular want to see at their events. So I think there's a very difficult balance. And it's interesting from the question, I forget exactly what the wording was, but in my head I was thinking normally for me that's flipped the other way. And normally it's venues and security quibbling about numbers, but from the opposite perspective, actually. I think, I'm really reassured what I heard Figen say about some security operators are actually walking away and won't be associated with jobs where they've been asked to cut or their staff aren't being paid correctly. So I don't know if I've answered that, but I think my answer is anything really, if you're talking about resource, you've got to come back and, we talk about this, the NDM, the JDM, that model around starting off with what actually is your information and your intelligence about that event. And intelligence doesn't need to be police intelligence. It can be, what has happened at a similar event, what has happened at the event down the road. It might have been different, but your patrons may be the same, or your issues in the zone X may be the same. So I think you have to start with threat and risk. And I think any security company that goes and bids cold for an event that perhaps hasn't looked at some of those issues, it may help you to try and consider that.
Thank you very much, Jill. Thanks. Well, thank you all on the panel. Thank you all for watching. We hope you've gained some valuable insight from today's discussion. And of course, thanks to our sponsors, Halo. See you next time for a session as we delve into the world of virtual events and how best to build them and attract audiences. Once again, thank you all very much.